The dawn of civilization. Primitive. Dangerous. Exciting. The handwriting is on the wall. If the human race is ever going to amount to anything, it needs
the most civilized caveman I have ever seen.
Look who's come out.
You're listening to the Knuckle Draggers Extravaganza on Z Digital if you're joining us live, or if you're listening to this at a later date through the magic of the internet on all the Cave Dwelling Music podcasting channels. My name is Matt, and over the last little while on the show, we've been playing a handful of tracks off this brand new Gelure record. Some really great stuff coming out of Adelaide, and we are lucky enough to have the man behind the project, Luca, joining us this evening. First and foremost, thanks for taking some time out and having a chat to us. It's greatly appreciated.
Thank you very much. It's a pleasure. It's all mine.
So let's get right into it. Actually, you know what? Before we do that, I always ask this question to Dungeon Synth people in particular, and I feel like it gets everything going in the right direction of where we want to go. If you're a wizard, would you be a pointy hat and staff kind of wizard, an emerald robe pondering an orb, or are you like a royal blue over a big cauldron?
Definitely a Gandalf type battle mage.
Yeah,
I think that was
pointy
pretty
hat
much
and
the
staff.
inspiration. Yeah, straight up. Big sort of long beard, long staff, pointy hat.
I also feel like it gives a good reflection of the kind of person as well, you know?
Yeah.
Like the person who picks the orb is always sitting there, you know, pondering as the meme goes. But no,
Yeah.
I'm glad. I had a feeling that would be the case just judging from the music, and we were spot on.
Yeah.
Let's talk about Inner Sanctum, though, because it is the latest record that you've got through Gelure. With this one here, is it a continuation on some of the stories that you were telling on the previous records? Like, I know on the one beforehand, there was a map of Vradanoth. There was a map associated with it. Are we still working in that similar realm or that similar area?
Yeah, in some ways. It's good that you noticed that from like the first album to the second, there was this kind of continuation of world building. I would say it's fairly on point with this new one. The only exception being mostly that this entire album took, nearly 4 years probably worth of creating.
Yeah, 2021 was the last one, hey?
Yeah, so it's been a while. With creating music in general, I'm sure you can imagine it's an exhausting endeavor, especially when you have so much in the back catalogue. What do you come up with that's new and refreshing for people to hear? On top of that, you have that idea of world building and making maps and interesting locations and stuff. So, I mean, from the start, it's always been this kind of Tolkien-esque kind of venture for myself. The initial start of all of that was actually through my main project, which is called Fathomage.
Yeah, I had
started off.
I had a question lined up for that a little bit later on, but I thought we'd hit Gelure first. But yeah, talk us through the transition between Fathomage and then moving into more of the Dungeon Synth realm.
Yeah, I mean, with the Fathomage side of things, I had the album Necro Hermitage of the Emotionally Starved. That particular album is all fundamentally like black metal in nature, but it was my first step into kind of world building and wanting to make my own kind of nerdery, let's say.
We're all nerds at heart.
That's right. And then came along the Dungeon Synth stuff with Fathomage, which is through Minas Morgul. And then that kind of was a catalyst for me to go, okay, I'm familiar with this Dungeon Synth world. I enjoy the aspect of world building. How can I kind of put the two together? And then sort of Gelure was born from those two things. And so then you have the Necro Hermitage era kind of being a fundamental kind of primordial start to all of that. The first Gelure album being this kind of expansion on top of that, and then Candlelight Times expanding even more on top of those things. With this new one, it's less so. It's more music-centered. I am planning on potentially drawing up another map and expanding upon the sort of universe, so to speak, because I do know that people do enjoy that stuff, and I got a kick out of it when people would tell me that they use these things for their D&D role-playing games and stuff like that. So It is something that I care about, and clearly people care about as well. So something definitely in the works.
I often feel like that fantasy RPG and like people who are really into that stuff do want, and if they wanted to make it particularly immersive, they will track down and find particular artists. And when they see something like you've drawn a map and they can tell that there's a story between one record to the next, even if this most recent one isn't so deeply tied to that story. It's that extra level of connection. You can go listen to the music, but that level of care and that level of thought that you've put into it really does resonate with people.
Yep. Yeah, I mean, I guess, as you said, we're all sort of nerds at heart, and I would say like 90% of us have either interacted with some of the Lord of the Rings films or read the books or...
Ironically, I am
with
rereading
fantasy.
Fellowship at the moment, so this is particularly well timed.
Hit the nail on the head.
Have you had a... Yeah, sorry, man, go.
No, I was just about to say, yeah, it's one of those things that's kind of beating the dead horse in terms of dungeon synth and black metal in general. Like how many countless bands have you seen or dungeon synth projects that have labeled on top of Tolkien? But I think that kind of fundamental mythos that he created, that sense of mythology that people want to convey, that sense of storytelling is kind of this kind of light that people are drawn to. And clearly it resonates with people.
And in association with being a musician, have you done any creative writing work yourself, or is it all associated in and around Fathomage and Gelure?
Yeah, it's exclusively music-based. I'm not an author by any means. I'm not the greatest at writing fictional narratives and whatnot, but I get a kick out of kind of, like with Gelure and some of the Fathomage stuff, creating a kind of Wikipedia worth of stuff of like the lore behind some of these places. Mm-hmm. So I've got a Google Drive document that just kind of, over the years, just goes through different places that I've drawn out with, said Gelure maps and stuff with Fathomage, and I'll create these kind of sceneries, characters, concepts and whatnot, just to kind of inspire myself what that kind of soundscape might sound like in my head. In addition to that, you obviously have some external media like movies, like books, audiobooks or whatever it might be, role-playing games, video games, movies. They all kind of play this complex part in creating these stories and things that I want to convey with my music. But, I mean, it's never been written-centered. It's always been music-centered.
You had a listening party for the release of Inner Sanctum, which is the most recent release, and this is what we're really going to get caught in the weeds in, and I like getting caught in the weeds on these kind of things. But how did you find a listening party? Was it a playthrough as well, or was it yourself and people associated through the Bandcamp actually sitting down and listening to the record together for the first time?
Yeah, so that was a mind-blowing experience because I'd never done those Bandcamp listening parties before. So, like, I put out the notice through social media going, hey, this is going to happen, anticipating maybe 1 to 2, 3 people at most, coming through. I think when we started that listening party, I had about 11 people, probably 12 people join up and just sit through the whole album there to listen and talk. And it was just that. People were listening, people were talking to me going, wow, this did something for me. I think one guy actually said that this made me cry.
Yeah, that was like one of the top comments was like, didn't expect to be crying on this first listen through.
Yeah. And I mean, for me as an artist and a musician, it goes for, I think, anyone here doing anything artistically related. When something that you've nurtured for how many years, months, and you've kind of packaged it in this beautiful little box with a bow tie. In my case, I've done all the mixing, mastering, and promotional work. You throw it out to the world, and then you're ready to have that, the anxiety of that, the reception of, are people going to like it? And then you get someone saying, this made me cry. There's no higher compliment, I think, for anyone to you can't top that kind of feeling.
How do you feel being the sole contributor to this? Because a few people that I've spoken to, they feel sometimes you can get lost in the weeds, being anxious or overthinking one particular part. Do I need to have it like this? Do I need to have it like that? Is that something that you feel because you've got sole control over it, you kind of hyper focus on things? Or are you able to take a step back and go, I'm happy with how this is. I like where this is going?
It's a bit of a love-hate relationship. It's one of those things where you are your absolute worst critic, and you will totally bash yourself in the worst way possible because, like, for me, I'm a perfectionist, and that makes things so much worse. And then on top of that, being an artist, being your own worst critic, you are, in my case, I am the only quality control in this world. So whatever I don't like and what do I do like, it's all up to me. So there is a comfort with that. But there is also that curse, as I said, with being your worst critic, own worst critic. In a band context, it's a bit more complex when you have maybe 4 to how many other people that's in that ensemble. You'll have a complex part in maybe songwriting, or there might be just one person songwriting, but everyone else will put their say in, let's say. With this, there is a lot more responsibility on your end because people are expecting something. They're expecting something that they want to lose themselves into. There's something sacred about that, you know, especially with the kind of contemplating music that we enjoy and listen to. You need to be able to kind of immerse that listener in that world. And how do you do that? How do you refreshen it up after? I mean, for me now, man, I've got probably 12 albums solo, that I've done ever. That's expanding upon maybe black metal, dungeon synth, and more ambient drone stuff. So every time when I release an album, it becomes a new battle. You know, it's a new blank canvas. How do I make this new that hasn't, like, you're not trying to invent the wheel by any means. But
no, not at all.
How do you try to get this stimulating for people who are in your little cult that you've developed that's new and whatnot? So I don't know. It's something that I think I'm still figuring out in terms of managing what I do like in terms of the music that I create and what I don't like. But I think that comes with time. And the other part where you said where, you know, am I a person that kind of just lets it sort of linger for a bit and then it is what it is, you know, let it be type of thing. There's also that aspect as well. And that, for me, with my songwriting, that usually might take like a week or so just to leave it for a while and then come back with proper fresh ears with whatever I've created. So yeah, I don't think I have a definite answer in some ways because it does switch between the two. But I mean, for any artist, yeah, it's a hard struggle. But I think the quality wouldn't be there if you weren't sort of being particularly anal about these things. So you don't want to get into analysis paralysis either. It's that kind of fine balance with all of that.
You hit the nail on the head, and it leads me into something that I was wanting to ask you, to not reinventing the wheel. And by the sounds of it, you and I are on the same page. Love dungeon synth as a genre. It's a great accoutrement to many things, and in and of itself, it's fantastic to listen to. But one thing that I really enjoyed about Inner Sanctum, and this is something that I find as a through line to a lot of really good dungeon synth, you don't stick with the regular meat and potatoes. Like you had, was like 5 or 6 non-synth based instruments on the record. I recognize what they are because I do a radio show with a guy who owns like an oud and all these strange instruments like that. But was that something that you were conscious of, to add more acoustic instruments, more sort of folk instruments, and more instruments of a time that you are trying to create? You know, that like Middle Ages fairground or contemplative kind of sound.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, we're all familiar with the, you know, lo-fi synthesizer that's from a Casio keyboard made in, you know, 1997. Like it's a beautiful sound. It's great, but like we've had enough. I think
we've heard it before, like, you know.
Yeah. And so how do you freshen things up for people? I guess in my case, I have this kind of lore that I've built up with songs on the new album, like, what was it called? The Northern Dunes of Gal Salathi. So that track number 5 on the new one. That particular song is exclusively meant to invoke kind of Eastern Mediterranean flavors into the mix. The very name itself, Gal Salathi, is kind of a root play on some of the Semitic words that you might find in those particular regions, let's say.
Mm-hmm. It sounds very June and Arrakis-esque.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's pretty much what I was going for. So with instruments like the oud, even in that particular track, you have an instrument called a duduk.
Mm-hmm.
That's sampled in there as well. So it's meant to have that kind of deserty feel to it, but without hitting the typical, I don't know, harmonic sort of scale flavors that you might get, in a typical ancient Egyptian documentary.
Yeah, I was about to say, I have this clip burnt into my head of every time a Western movie goes to somewhere in Egypt, and it's the exact chord that I'm talking about.
I know the exact meme you're talking about.
I know exactly what you mean. You try and evoke that kind of sound, but you don't want to memify yourself in that regard. But then you also don't want to lean back into the dungeon synth meme of that really choppy 8-bit keyboard sound that should be and often was used as like a side-scrolling RPG soundtrack.
Yeah. And I mean, that sound will always be cultivated. It'll always be there in this kind of genre. That flavor will never be lost just because it's so integral to the sound that we all know and love. Whether someone can kind of make up a new sound with it, I guess time will tell. But in my own context with what I do, something like with the instruments like the oud is pretty reminiscent on my cultural background. So my background is Serbian, Croatian. And you have these sort of Eastern, let's say Turkish maybe instruments from time to time that come through with our traditional folk music. And stuff like that I'm trying to kind of incorporate more and more. Yeah. Whether it be Fathmage or definitely with Gelure now. But it's a matter of like, you don't want to make these songs and just chuck in random, I don't know, instruments that might not necessarily fit the context with what you're making. There's that trap as well. It's a matter of finding, I guess, maybe an exotic instrument, and then how can you make it work with a world that's so predominantly, let's say, Anglo-Saxon mythology in nature. It's a blending of, I guess, Western and Eastern flavors, but it's an art to get those things right.
That actually hits on something that I think about often in regards to dungeon synth, and I suppose particularly dungeon synth in the Americas and in Australia, because we don't really have that direct connection to castles and that medieval sort of time frame, and like the aesthetics is still borrowed 100%, but you don't have that cultural connection. It's interesting you saying that you're including, and it pans out really well in the music because, like you said, it sounds different, but it also sounds exactly like it should, if that makes sense. Like like the inclusion of the duduk and those instruments come directly from you, but then it also fits exactly in Gelure as the dungeon synth project.
Yeah. Yeah, it's a hard sort of battle, I guess, with something like Anglo-Saxon kind of mythology that's so pervasive in dungeon synth. It's hard to kind of, with the castles and stuff, as you mentioned before, with like England and let's say wider Europe in general, you'll have that aspect, but you also have like America is pretty much dominating the scene at this point.
It is.
And it's that kind of, it's fascinating because America obviously is a pretty new country as much as Australia is in recent history, but they have no sense of medieval history. They have no sense of ancient history, let's say. But there's this core fascination that kind of binds us to that world, whether it's a sense of storytelling, whether it's a sense of mythos, a fascination with the history. I'm not really sure, I guess, in terms of what is the single defining point that's all drawing us to this world. It might be because, I guess, a lot of the dungeon synth stuff that came through in the early 90s, it's all centered around black metal, has those roots there. And I guess if we're going to take, let's say, the Norwegian scene, for example, I mean, all of that scenery in Norway is just stunning. You have forests, fjords, all these rivers and creeks. Like, you're never going to find that kind of music in the, tropical world,
no,
so to speak. So when you have that awesome kind of scenery that you're seeing in front of you, plus with the rich history, I guess, in Norway's context, they have that Viking ancient Scandinavian history. No wonder these, grand symphonies, even in the classical world, people like Jean Sibelius in Finland, all these beautiful scenes that he got to witness creates these awe-inspiring kind of soundscapes. And I think part of that is reflected in what was back then something new and intriguing with the black metal world, combining that sense of extreme side of metal, that's one part obviously, but then that kind of atmosphere that drew all of us in at some point, it fits in so well with the medieval context in, let's say, England, or in the Viking context if it's Scandinavia. But I'm not sure what, maybe someone else can point out later on, but it is a fascinating thing that I thought about. I guess there is something so, maybe it is the mythology, maybe like with the poetry and some of the movies that in pop culture that we've interacted with over the years. There's this kind of fascination with that world.
And I think that fascination with the world is pervasive because, you and I were talking about before everything in regards to Tolkien. And God, how many separate fantasy novels, like young adult novels, are based in that sort of realm? I remember reading The Ranger's Apprentice, if you remember that series, and just being absolutely hooked by it. And it's, again, the same thing. It's that medieval era, castles, cloaks, wizards and everything. I don't know. It just seems like one of the most pervasive things. And then it also makes me laugh whenever I think about Dino Synth, because that's a similar,
right.
It's like a similar world, right? Like as a kid, at least as like as a boy, like what are the two things that nerdy boys are obsessed with? You're either obsessed with fucking castles and swords, or you're obsessed with dinosaurs,
Yeah, exactly right. Yeah, I don't know. The whole Dino Synth thing has fascinated me actually since it sort of came out. I know that guy, I think it's LT from Dungeon Deep Records. He does what is it? Diplodocus, I think it's called.
Yeah, I think that is the one project that everyone goes back to. I didn't realize there was a guy from Dungeon Deep Records. That's cool.
Yeah. So he fronts that thing. But like I think discovering that one of the albums on Dungeon Synth Archives, I just went, what is this? I mean, it's a great album, obviously. People love it. It's kind of a staple now since it came out. But I guess there's this kind of risk with coming up with something like that. You don't want it to be like gimmicky, I guess.
Yeah, exactly.
And you don't want to, like, it can be a bit hypocritical. It's a bit hypocritical for me to say that when you say gimmicky, when the fact that so many people kind of bash the whole medieval thing so much now, as we just talked about before. But, I mean, you have this kind of genesis of, comfy synth as well?
Oh, I've not heard of comfy synth.
Yeah, so
but
that
the name kind of pretty much encapsulates it in the whole.
Yeah. And, I mean, do you know the project Grandma's Cottage?
I do not.
So LT from Dungeon Deep Records, he fronts that project as well. But the whole thing is centered on, like, coziness, cup of tea, scones and stuff like that. So comfy vibes.
Yeah.
But again, there's this kind of risk with that where someone comes up with a concept first, people kind of enjoy the theme and the aesthetic of it, but then how far can you stretch it before it becomes like a gimmick?
Yeah. Sorry, I was, as you said that, I was looking up Grandma's Cottage, and it kind of reminds me when Vaporwave initially blew up, and it was that reconstituting that 80s super pastel, hyper commercialized thing, whereas Grandma's Cottage kind of like there's an explosion of cottagecore now, and I think it's been going on for a while, but you know exactly what I mean, like people looking at those like period piece movies where everyone's in gardens and having tea parties. It's kind of that energy behind it.
Yeah, there's this kind of, I guess, it's a different kind of escapism, I think. We just touched on Tolkien and fantasy. That's one part, obviously. But then there's this kind of, comfy vibe that people are looking for. And I don't know whether that's a symptom of our hyper-industrialized world, the whole 9-to-5 grind or whatever kind of hours you might be working throughout the day. The fact of the matter is people are working crazy hours to kind of live in this day and age. So when you have that grind that you have to go through, you're going to have to kind of come back home and realize, okay, what's next? What else?
Yeah.
And so I guess for some people, this kind of comfy vibe works for them. It's a different kind of escapism, as much as fantasy, as I said, is another kind of escapism.
I want to touch on another project that you were a part of. You were enlisted to be part of the Riddle of Fire soundtrack, if my lurking of the social media is not mistaken. Talk us through that project and talk us through how that came about, because that seems like an interesting aside.
Yeah, it was a random day, I guess. I get an email through my inbox, and I think it was the director who basically just said, "Hey, I'm thinking of using some of your songs from one of the songs from your first album. It's going to be an independent indie film. We're going to have it sort of air in Cannes Film Festival. Would you be interested?" And I looked at it. I'm like, okay, this is either a scam or, what's going on here. But I get the message directly from Bandcamp, so someone clearly sourced it out.
Yeah,
and found me through Bandcamp.
It's not like you're going to get. Well, I don't know if you do get spam messages on Bandcamp, but someone has clearly trawled through enough to go on. This is exactly where I need to go.
And it's that kind of thought where I'm like, okay, someone, clearly went through the time to find the exact button and whatnot to push and send through that email. So I kind of ended up entertaining it and going, okay, cool. What's in it for me type of thing? How can I kind of benefit from this?
Yeah, exactly.
And so, he mentioned Cannes Film Festival. And I don't know if the viewers know about Cannes Film Festival. It's one of the sort of major points in France where they have these massive sort of it's a massive film festival that kind of gains a lot of traction.
Yeah, I think it's Cannes, and is Sundance the other major one?
Yeah, I think so. And so when you're presented with that kind of opportunity, you go, okay, I mean, if anything else, promotion is the big thing here.
Yeah, exactly.
And so, we ended up talking. I think he ended up passing, it was the director at first, but then he ended up passing it to one of his associates to kind of finalize everything. But there were no physical releases or anything like that promised at that time. It was just, can we use your music? We'll pay for a bit of licensing type of thing. Mm-hmm. Is it okay? I said, yeah, no worries, all good. I'll just make sure with my record label if everything's okay with that. And it was all good. And I guess fast forwarding, it got released at some point. Ended up airing at Cannes. And I'm not sure what it's doing at the moment in terms of, because this is all based in America.
Yeah.
I've got no idea whether it's still screening on cinemas or not. But I myself haven't had the opportunity to actually see the film. It is on the American Amazon. You can actually buy it through there, but I don't have a VPN or anything like that to be able to kind of outsource, let's say, through something like that. So I've yet to see it. I'd love to see it. But it was a specific, one of the director was actually asking for a specific point in the song Entrance to the Nekethian Dwarfs from the first album. It's this particular synth sequence that's reminiscent of, what's its name? Windear. I don't know if you know that project from Norway.
I don't.
Early 90s. So, seminal kind of early 90s black metal solo act. He incorporated a lot of synth work that might be reminiscent of like Tangerine Dream and some of the synth work that's from that era. Sort of German pioneering kind of sounds.
No, I have listened to this record. You know when you you hear so many names and they're all
yes, incomprehensible Viking name.
Yeah, I was about to say as a native English speaker, this often catches me. Trying to slowly but surely learning Italian to do "Nunno Nunno proud," but we're getting there slow.
That's right. Yeah, there's an advantage, I think, to having, I'm fluent in Serbian, and Serbian was my first language. So there's that kind of advantage that you have where you can interact with some of the literature from that side of the world.
Oh, that's a good point, yeah.
And kind of interact with, ancient stories, history, and stuff like that to be able to inspire you in so many other ways that you might not get with English as a language. English is beautiful, but there are some things in Serbian, in my case, that you just cannot translate or convey in a particular way that would have the same power that it would be in English. Yeah,
there's a couple of Italian philosophers that I've been trying to work through, and the one thing or the one word or phrase that's really throwing me off, there's 3, maybe 4 different phrases for the term thinking or thought.
Yeah. And
where in English it's you think something, you thought something, or you had a thought. They've got it locked down into it when it comes into tenses and everything, and trying to do that mental double speak of, okay, this is what it is in Italian, trying to do the grammar, but then also putting it back in comprehensible English, it throws me.
Yeah. I mean, Serbian is pretty much the same in the sense that the written language is in Cyrillic. In other words, in sort of Russian letters, let's say. But it's all phonetically spelt. So however you say it, it's spelt in that way.
Yeah.
There's that advantage, I guess, it has over English. The downside to it is that the grammar is insanely complex.
Yeah.
As you said, one word will have, depending on the context of that word, might have 5 different variations.
Exactly.
So it's hard to kind of... it's a tricky one.
I always think as long as you've got like the root of the word when it comes to past and present tense, it's genuinely like a puzzle because you've got like the root word and then you go, okay, but now it's got this suffix at the end of it. How does this work into it? But we're getting there slowly, slowly but surely.
Yeah, it's just touching back on the whole inspiration with the Serbian language thing. I just realized that in terms of my cultural background, we have this tradition of playing a gusla, let's say.
Okay.
Gusla is like this kind of instrument where it's like a bowed lyre. You typically one string, bowed, as I said, and it has this kind of ornate looking kind of maybe an eagle head or a goat head on top. Very folk looking instrument.
Yeah.
Now, this particular instrument isn't necessarily very melodic. It's actually quite dissonant when you listen to it. But what it's used for listening to basically epic poetry. So even to this day now, you'll have these particular, let's say, pubs or taverns or whatever around Serbia. Even might be at home, let's say. But you'll have this tradition of someone who's taken their, years and years and years to memorize these epic poems that might be recited for like 45 minutes straight.
Yeah.
Almost an hour-long venture for these guys. But it's detailing important moments of history, like, let's say, the Battle of Kosovo or some of the Christian history that's in Serbia or whatever it might be. Maybe some of the mythology, let's say. These guys cultivate that kind of knowledge and they use that to kind of educate others. Back in history, obviously, this was a time before the internet, before maybe people were literate and whatnot. So it was a way to kind of learn about your own history, maybe a family history or whatever it might be. This might be maybe reminiscent of some of the skaldic poets in, the Viking world, where you could picture this in like a mead hall and someone's reciting, maybe like Beowulf or something like that with a lyre or harp. It's the same concept, but you still have that tradition that's alive and well in Serbia. So that idea of wanting to explain that kind of mythology to people and let them sit down and just listen to something for 45 minutes straight. In my case, there's nothing lyrical per se, but it's a world that I'm trying to convey to the listener that means something to me and it hopefully means something to them as well.
On the topic of meaning, was there a particular reason why you chose Joseph Noel Patton's painting for the cover of Inner Sanctum? Michelangelo's Dream is the painting in particular, but did you feel a resonance between that painting and the album itself?
Yeah, I did. It's one of those things that takes a lot of time for me to kind of down pat in terms of what will be the cover art photo. With the first record, it was my first kind of proper step into the dungeon synth world. I opted out for the typical castle in the middle of the forest type of thing. It's nothing necessarily more profound than that. But, as the music kind of was developed at the time, I used that image of the castle to kind of paint the soundscape, let's say. And then the first album's official release with that album was kind of me kind of looking into that album art and going, okay, what does this world sound like type of thing. So that the sound that you hear on the first album is a kind of reflection on what I'm looking at with that album art. With the Candlelight Tomes, it was a bit different. Again, I'm trying to source out with some of the songs that I might have demoed out or created in the past. And I'm like, okay, what kind of cover art will fit with this kind of vibe? With the Candlelight Tomes, it took on this more contemplative sound, I think.
Yeah, a little bit more introspective.
Yeah, definitely. And it's one of those things where I'm like, okay, I could go for the forest castle thing, but I ended up finding that photo of that gentleman that's kind of wizardly looking, sitting down next to a book or something like that with a lamp just on top of it and contemplating or reading or whatever it might be doing. But it's invoking that sense of contemplation, which I think the Candlelight Tomes really kind of kicked off that sense. So I think that actual cover art there is, it's not actually a painting, weirdly enough. I think I ended up finding out it's actually it was developed in 1800 something, maybe 1890, let's say.
Yeah.
But it was from a time, I think, in Paris where they were trying to create photos that look like portraits, like oil paintings. And so one of that was a result of one of those endeavors.
I can
So
see
I'm not sure
that.
if people actually know that. Yeah, so that's an actual photo of someone just dressed up in a costume that kind of is meant to look like an oil painting.
That's an incredibly well done photo then, if that's the case.
It is. Yeah, no, it's crazy. And I as I said, I thought it was a painting at first. But yeah, I mean, to be honest, with Candlelight Tomes and then going into Inner Sanctum now, the music that I was creating since 2021 to this year, it still had this inherent introspective sort of sound. And with anything, I guess, artistically, all starts with a blank canvas, and that includes something like the cover art. I was thinking about getting something commissioned. I've done commission work with commission work before with Fathomage, and it's done me well. But with something like this, there's a particular feeling or vibe that I'm looking for that I'm not sure an artist might be able to reproduce.
Yeah, exactly.
A lot of the romantic painters in like 19th, 20th, 21st century, they all kind of had this vibe, maybe. So with Michelangelo's painting, or depiction of him there, it's very very reminiscent of Candlelight Tomes if you put two and two together.
Yeah.
It's this kind of hunchbacked old man thinking about something, whatever it might be. But it was more so actually the background. So just looking at it now, this kind of teal aqua sort of nightscape that's in the background really kind of worked with me. It's probably more
and especially the
subconsciously just
contrast.
thinking. Yeah,
Especially with the contrast of like the quite dark cloaked figure at the front, and then those almost like maroon, burnt orange arches as well.
yes. Just thinking about it, man, like in terms of the subconscious, I reckon this is probably more reminiscent of, I don't know if you ever played Skyrim, the Elder Scrolls.
I haven't played it for a while because
Yeah.
unfortunately with those games, and you're probably in a similar boat, I love it, but at the same time, I know how much of a time sink it is.
Yes.
And I've thankfully avoided the trap. I was like, look, I'll download it for a little bit and then I'll replay it just to hit that itch. And then as soon as I get into it, I'm like, I 20 minutes and I'm done. Otherwise, we're gone,
That's right. Yeah, that's the kind of adult life, isn't it?
Yeah.
You kind of you invoke that sense of nostalgia that you had as a kid, experience these things, and then you just have there's no time for it.
Yeah.
We're all working people one way or another. But I mean, with Skyrim, it's like maybe if you remember, like when you'd be walking around in the middle of the forest at night and you see those like aurora borealis kind of nightscapes.
Yeah.
I think that imagery spoke to me as a kid, and so many others, I guess, in this case. And I think just thinking about it now, there is that kind of subconscious thing going on with the contemplative music that I have with Inner Sanctum, and then having that atmospheric element as well with the cover art, as I said, with the nightscape, with the moon, and sort of maybe it looks like it's just about to be sundown or something like that. Sunset, there's that atmosphere as well with it. So it's kind of two birds with one stone with this. And then this sort of surrounding architecture of, the I don't know, priory that's there, or in the book as well, or just on the left. It all plays a part, I think.
It took me pretty much up until earlier this year to, like, I was interested in all different forms of art, but I think visual art, and in particular paintings and this kind of stuff, took me a while to really wrap my head around. Have you watched the YouTube series Sister Wendy Beckett?
No.
Because I feel like you'd really... So she was this, I want to say, Scottish or English nun who studied the medieval masters for years. And then somehow the BBC stumbled upon this woman, gave her a show, and it's just her going to different galleries around Europe, looking at these stunning old paintings. And it wasn't until watching that I was able to pick up these things that you're putting down in terms of like looking at the picture as a whole and then breaking it down individually and how it relates. But everything you've said there, it does tie into that contemplative mindset, the introspective music. Do you find that this is like a form of journaling for you, for lack of a better term, when you come to writing Gelure stuff?
Absolutely. I think that stands for Gelure and stuff with Fathomage, and like I have ambient music under my own name as well. This is all kind of a sonic diary, let's put it that way. I mean, the earliest releases with Fathomage were circa 2018. At that time, I was only about 17, 18 years old. I'm 25, 26 this year.
Yeah.
So since then, like I've changed as a person. My music style has changed. Same with my mixing and mastering and stuff like that since then. And a lot of stuff, you know, in my private life too, things have changed as much as anyone else's. So all these things play a part in the sound that you create in the particular context of whatever album you might sort of look into. But it's just the same with anything that I make with Gelure now. Everything has its kind of place. And everything that I make with Fathomage or Gelure, it's like a carefully crafted jewel that I want to convey to people. These things, as I said to you earlier in the interview, like I might sit on a track that only has a minute worth of music and I'll let that simmer and brew for about a week just to see if I like it or not.
Yeah.
It's that kind of care and attention that I try to give it. Yeah.
I like that. It's a really interesting approach, and it kind of, like you said with that guy who, or the commenter at the very least, who said that the music made him cry, it does seem to resonate quite well with other people as well.
Yeah. And I mean, it is genuinely the most meaningful thing that any artist could receive, as I said to you before. A lot of people, you know, that's one part of that guy through the listening party that he mentioned. But a lot of other people are saying, like, this is the best thing I've ever heard. You got kind of, you really hit the nail on the head type of thing. And again, that's another part to that as well. I guess you forget how overstimulated sometimes we are in this modern age with TikTok, Instagram and whatnot. And for people to just sit down with you for 45 minutes to an hour and listen to something that you yourself, like they don't actually have to be there.
Yeah.
Mind-blowing as it is. This is out of their own complete free will. The fact that they heard my music in the past and went, wow, this is great. I'm going to now attend that listening party of his and sit there for an hour and talk to him and, you know, get to know this guy. Like it's an interesting thing. And as I said to you just now with TikTok and Instagram, we're so overtly stimulated, you know, we're looking for the next best dopamine hit, you know, within 5 seconds. It's kind of now the album sort of format is becoming lost, I think, in some ways, especially with newer generations.
Yeah.
Like it's, I mean, I grew up with playlists and stuff like that, not necessarily with physical music either, but with how niche this music is, tapes are obviously a huge part of it, but it has those roots with black metal. And so vinyl records, CDs and stuff like that, they all, like, there's an expectation of you as a consumer of that music genre. You'll be partaking eventually at some point, whether you are or whether you're not. The same goes for dungeon synth and tapes and stuff like that, vinyl records. There's that tangibility and aspect that people want to interact with. And so even if you're not used to that aspect of sitting down for an hour and just experiencing something new, you kind of have no choice with this kind of genre.
Yeah.
I mean, when you think of Chaucerian Myth, I think, from 2016. I don't know if you ever heard that project. That's 3.5 hours long.
Yeah, that's massive.
I don't think many people have actually sat down and listened to the whole thing in full, nor was it really meant to be kind of listened to the whole thing in full in one go. But it shows you the care and attention that people have with stuff like this. And it's an hour, in his case, it's 3.5 hours of something that he conceived. This was before, I guess, the genesis of AI was even a thing.
Yeah.
This is all solely built from someone's, you know, abstract conception. The same goes with the music that I make. I've never integrated AI, never will. But yeah, weirdly enough, just as a side topic to that, I've actually noticed that with the new stuff that comes out now with Dungeon Synth, people are starting to put like disclaimers on their music,
To
saying
say-
this is not AI related.
Really?
Yeah, it's becoming a thing, weirdly enough. I mean, I did it in my album credits. I have basically it's saying this is not AI. There's no AI conception or anything like that.
Yeah.
But this was actually a sole accident, not realizing how many people are doing it at a pervasive level.
I didn't realize that was the thing. Like, I know that the Spotify algorithm on a Friday does get bombed with, nonsense that
Yes.
quite clearly is AI. And I go, oh, sweet, I didn't know they had a new track. And you look at the album cover and you go, oh, no, that's that's not new.
Yeah. I mean, we're at the moment, I've heard and kind of witnessed this myself. We're getting pretty plagued with the whole AI abomination that's going on. You're getting these sort of YouTube channels that are popping up and uploading like 4 albums that have songs that are all coincidentally 4 minutes or something long, and they're uploading it daily. These hour-long sort of albums, and they're obviously AI, but it's a kind of maybe it's a topic for another time. But it's a war that kind of started without us necessarily wanting to even have that war, but we're still battling it, and I think the approach at the moment is a bit warped in the sense that we artists who are actually coming up with this kind of music from our own, own free will and our own sort of abstract conception, who are not ever integrating any AI in itself.
No.
You'll have that kind of war that you need to kind of wage yourself on and find yourself needing to kind of go, okay, is this it or is this not type of thing.
And I feel as though Dungeon Synth, unfortunately, is quite, I'm not going to say easy pickings, but because it's not dynamic's not the right word, but you understand what, like, the sort of sentiment that I'm getting at here. Because it's a genre that does focus on a lot of foreign or digital sounds, if we're going back to the old Casio keyboard kind of stuff.
Yeah.
I feel like it can be AI can be quite a pervasive thing in that, and especially with how uniform a lot of the sounds and a lot of the imagery is.
Yeah. It's a weird world that we live in now, and finding ourselves, as artists. AI is a massive topic, as I said to you, so maybe we might not have time to kind of expand a whole lot on it with this interview. But I mean, I have albums that are an hour and a half long, and it's a big ask for someone to create an album an hour and a half long and expect the listener to sit through the whole thing and go through the whole thing, yet alone make physical copies of this stuff, especially with vinyl records. Like, if it's an hour and a half long, you're expecting a double LP at that point.
Oh, at
So
least,
there's production costs on top of that. So it's a big risk in and of itself, but I think I'd rather, and I think, what is it, 95% of us will totally agree, you'd rather have that than some sort of AI abortion that has no soul, that has no drive, it's just this algorithmic abomination that came out of nothing and just learnt something, however many times it had to learn to produce such a thing. And people can still tell that it's AI,
Yeah.
funny enough. Even if you give it like 5,000 Dungeon Synth tracks to kind of listen to, it's still going to sound like an AI. It's never going to replicate that kind of niche sound that we all know and love.
It's like what you said earlier on with the romantic artist. There's just that particular vibe that you can't quite get anywhere else.
Yeah. I mean, even with the romantic artist thing, like, this is from a time where there was a proper academic sort of side to art as well. Not that it's really lost nowadays. You still have these bastions in France and Russia and whatnot who are creating these masterpieces even to this day. But you have that advent of, the 20th century with like Jackson Pollock and maybe like Picasso is probably an early kind of instigator with these things, diverging from orthodox to the unorthodox, let's say. And then you have this genesis of the modern art world, which, I mean, I won't get into in this case. It's all the power to you if you like that kind of stuff. For me personally, I don't necessarily vibe with that. That's why I kind of like a lot of the romantic artists, because there's that sense of artistic integrity with stuff like Inner Sanctum and the art, cover art that's used there.
Yeah.
Someone took years probably at least to probably paint that thing, whether it was a commission or whether it's out of his own free will, I don't know. but that particular artist would have taken years at an academy to actually learn the fundamentals of anatomy and how to actually draw these things, and then architecture as well. Like just looking at the album art now, there's landscaping, there's architecture, there's portraiture, there's complex elements and stuff like this that would have taken probably decades, frankly, to kind of get at a solid grasp. It's a weird one.
You touched on physical releases a little while ago, and I'm wondering, you've got a partnership with Northern Silence Productions. With the release of Inner Sanctum, are we looking at some physical releases coming up soon? I don't know if you're a touring dungeon synth artist, which can seem like a bit of an oxymoron at times, but have you got a launch show planned now that everything's come out? What's the remainder of the year looking like off the back of this?
Yeah, so definitely physical releases planned. As you mentioned with Northern Silence, I'll be doing a CD release. If that goes pretty well, we'll look into vinyl records. I'll be doing a tape release with another company, or record label rather. I'll shall name nameless at this point, but it's a fairly big player in the dungeon synth world.
We'll keep an eye out for it.
Yeah, keep an eye out on the socials. You'll see if it comes to it. So definitely physical releases coming soon. In terms of concerts and stuff like that, I don't tour, and I don't actually have plans to, I guess, in this case.
Is that to keep the music contemplative? Because I know the one that I always go back to when it comes to large or bands that don't tour their music because they think when they play it live or it presents it in a different way, was Darkthrone. I can't ever remember Darkthrone doing a live show. What's the thoughts behind you not playing live, if you don't mind my asking?
I was just about to say the whole Darkthrone thing, the Darkthrone aspect to all of that stuff. There's a couple of things with that. So as you said, Darkthrone has this kind of sound that's very introspective, very introverted, let's say, and it kind of would be an abomination to have them now play live. It just doesn't fit their kind of vibe that they're going for.
It rips it out of the context that they initially created it for.
Yeah, absolutely. So there's that aspect to it. Another part of it, which is much more simpler, is the fact that I can't remember like 90% of the stuff that I write. So even if I wanted to kind of play, 4 tracks of the first album, I would have to probably take a good month to really just nail everything down to see what I'm doing. And then that does that. And then the fact that you need to kind of put this in a live context of, okay, well, I'm a solo musician. I can only play one instrument at a time or 2 instruments if you're lucky, with 80 tracks altogether on that in the entire song that you built. So there's that complexity to it. But then there's, I guess, at a more deeper level, there's this kind of thing where if you are playing live, you're essentially an entertainer. Mm-hmm. You're there to entertain people, and I don't like, as you said, with the music that I make with Gelure, it's very contemplative, and I don't like the fact that it's kind of this expectation of dance monkey dance.
Yeah, exactly.
Do the thing that we all like.
Say the line, Bart.
Yeah, exactly that. That's exactly right. And so even with like Fathimage and whatnot, like I've never felt the need to put that black metal music in a live context. Just because, there's so many layers with some of the stuff with Fathimage. Like I have probably sometimes 5 guitar tracks going on at the same time with different harmonies and whatnot. So how do you kind of, like, what do you cull in that case? Because you can't get 5 guitar players.
No.
And how do you, like, what's the compromise in this case? And then you need to think about, okay, if it's a band context with Fathimage, what am I going to be playing? It's either going to be me singing, guitar, bass, whatever it might be. With Gelure, that's another beast on its own because you're a solo person in this case. Mm-hmm. You're the only one. You have 2 hands. You can only do so much with those 2 hands. And so there's that, and the fact that, there's just that philosophy of I can't get my head around of dance monkey dance. There's something, listening to an album is a sacred venture, I think. I probably touched on it before.
Yeah.
There's something inherently sacred with that. And to be, I'm sure it would sound great live. I have no doubt in my mind. If I really put my mind to it and set these things up, I could make something out of it. but I don't think it would ever really sit right with me personally, just because the whole point was sit down and go for a walk in a forest or a walk anywhere for an hour and a half and just take that music in and let your mind wander somewhere else.
I also feel like when you think of dungeon synth shows, and I've seen a couple live, there's almost always an associated stage setup. It almost becomes like a, when you're in a band, you're there on stage playing your instruments. But when it comes to dungeon synth, like I was lucky enough to see Questmaster last year. I've seen Lurid Orb a couple of times. John says hello, by the way.
I say hello back. He's a colleague of mine.
But talking to those guys and seeing those guys, it's not just you're at the synth or you're not at your instrument playing. You need to have some visual sort of representation. There's like to say performative aspect seems a little bit redundant, but you need to, because you're a solo artist on the stage, you almost need to do more and be more to capture people's attention. Whereas a band can get up there with, denim shorts, a long sleeve black shirt, and thrash out a 45-minute set.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think just because of the niche nature of our music, you have that typical guy comes on stage with a robe and, has his kind of synthesizer set up with a candle or something lit up. Mm-hmm. It's that typical dungeon synth vibe that people are looking for, which is great. I've got no problem with that. But when you go to like Northern Siege or Albion Fest and all these big major dungeon synth sort of festivals that are going around now, particularly in America, and like every person is doing the same thing, like there's nothing visually interesting about it.
Yeah.
Granted, I guess you could probably make the counter argument that this music is not necessarily visual per se. It is more maybe introspective or more atmospheric. So people are there just to kind of chill out and kind of let their mind wander for a bit as well. So I got no problems with that either. But I mean, yeah, with the band context, especially in like let's say maybe Amon Amarth is a good example. They have the whole Viking metal set up. It's that typical like metal pop music that people enjoy. Something like Sabaton as well. Mm-hmm. They have that big vibe that people can just kind of have a couple of drinks, enjoy, party. But then with something like, I guess, Amon Amarth, you have that Viking theme that they're so known by. Mm-hmm. And a lot of their stage shows will have this massive, elaborate stage setup with Viking ships and swords. And, I think I remember seeing a video of them doing like a live sort of sword fight and stuff like that. So cool. I mean, it's the most Amon Amarth thing you could possibly imagine. The most metal thing you could possibly imagine. But, I mean, context matters, I guess, in this case. And I'm not sure whether we'll ever see... Maybe the closest thing is something like Diplodocus or another project is called Pumpkin Witch. I'm not sure if you heard of that one.
Oh, I have not.
So he has like the whole Halloween sort of pumpkin jack-o'-lantern sort of thing going in. Yeah. So he wears that on stage and kind of dances around, and Diplodocus obviously has the dinosaur theme. So there's that sort of novelty that people enjoy. But whether we'll ever have, flames and, massive fights on stage and stuff like that, I guess time will tell. But, it depends on the person, the context, I think.
That's everything that I had lined up in regards to questions. And I am conscious of your time. But before we finish up, is there anything that we might have missed, or is anything in regards to Gelure or anything that you wanted to bring up?
No, I think just, thank you for this opportunity. This is probably the first proper in-depth interview that I've actually done with Gelure. I've done interviews in the past with Fathimage and stuff like that. But this is the very first time I got to kind of really expand upon this world that I've been creating, circa 2020 actually, frankly, since the first album. And so having basically 5 years in between that point of never really being able to elaborate on some of these things and wanting to, very grateful.
There's absolutely no worries at all, man. I really appreciate you taking the time out and having a chat to us. But before we finish up, we do have to do the usual spruiking of everything. So if people wanted to get in contact with you and pick up some of the tapes from the older releases, Bandcamp is the place to go, and I would hazard a guess that social medias is also a good shout.
Yeah, absolutely. Social media, I'm on Instagram and Facebook for both projects, Fathimage and Gelure. You can find all those links either through those socials, or if you can't find them, go to my Bandcamp page. The links are all there. I've got Spotify, iTunes, whatever. It's all my music is on there as well. In terms of physical releases, I think there's no more tapes at this point with some of the previous releases. I've got a couple. I've got CDs and stuff like that. No tapes, but I got CDs, and I've got some vinyl records that people are interested with. Something like the Candlelight Tomes. As we said before, with the new album, physical media will be coming soon, so stay tuned for that. And yes, Fathomage and stuff like that. I've got plenty of CDs, records and stuff like that as well. So head on over if that interests you.
I did say that was going to be our last question, but I just got a message from John, and he wants to know what your favorite fantasy villain of all time is.
Okay. Jeez, that's put me on the spot.
Yeah,
I don't know. Just because I guess I grew up with Tolkien in a lot of the books and movies and stuff, I think I just have this fondness of Morgoth. Yeah. Being this kind of supreme entity of evil. And it kind of, just because we've touched on mythology and stuff in this interview before, and like Tolkien was definitely going for that biblical narrative with the creation of his world and with the Silmarillion and stuff like that. And so when you have this kind of grand, biblical, awesome sort of opening to his Silmarillion novel, and you have this aspect of good and evil, I don't think there's anyone more badass, in my opinion, apart from someone like Morgoth, who kind of, has that crown and the sort of the sword and this embodiment of evil, who's fighting, these great, massive spiders and Balrogs and stuff like that. It's just, I think, just from the top of my head, probably something like Morgoth or Melkor, however you want to call him.
I knew you were gonna come through with the Melkor name, and I'm very glad that you did.
I'm a nerd at heart, man.
No, we all are. Like I said, dude, I really appreciate you taking the time out and having a chat to us. This has been an absolute blast. We'll, if and when there's a new Fathomage or a new Gelure record